Here's the thing about maps. They seem so ordinary, right? Just pieces of paper or pixels on a screen showing you where to go, where you are, and how to get where you're trying to be. But if you look closer, they're way more than just directional cheat sheets. Some are full of lies, some exaggerate, and some are just plain weird. And one, which I'll get to later by the way, actually had something written on it that became one of the most enduring myths about cartography. So buckle in, because I'm Mike with List 25, and we're about to wander through 25 of the strangest, funniest, and most surprising map facts you've probably never heard of. But before we begin, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, click that notification bell so you don't miss out on any new content. Truly helps the channel. With that out of the way, let's jump on a pelican and head to everyone's favorite Halo level, the Silent Cartographer. 25. Greenland isn't the giant you think it is. If you grew up staring at a world map in school, you probably got tricked into thinking Greenland is massive. On the Mercator projection, the one used in most classrooms, it looks like a hulking landmass roughly the size of Africa. But here's the truth bomb. Africa is about 14 times larger. So why the distortion? The Mercator projection was designed in the 1500s for navigators, so it keeps directions accurate, but wildly messes up land sizes as you move toward the poles. That's why Greenland looks inflated like a balloon, while equatorial regions like Africa and South America get squashed. Next time you see Greenland looming like a frozen giant, remember, it's actually closer in size to Mexico. 24. There's no such thing as a perfect map. Here's the kicker. Because the Earth is round, you can't flatten it without bending reality somewhere. Try slicing a basketball and pressing it flat. You're going to end up with rips, bulges, or weird stretching. That's exactly what happens with maps. Every projection makes a choice about what to distort. Some keep shapes neat but ruin areas. Others show true size but stretch countries into funky shapes. That's why Greenland shrinks and Africa grows in the Peters projection, while everything looks like origami art on a Dymaxion map. Basically, a perfect map doesn't exist, and anyone claiming otherwise is selling you an illusion. What you get instead are compromises depending on what matters most: navigation, fairness, aesthetics, or just familiarity. This is my globe from when I was a child. The USSR still exists. Doesn't have a year on it. It might somewhere. I can't find it. But at least 1991 and older, because, you know, the USSR. I've had this for so long. 23. North isn't supposed to be up. The north-up convention is just a choice, not a law of nature. Medieval European maps often put east at the top. Literally, that's where the word orientation comes from, orienting towards the Orient. Islamic maps during the golden age of cartography sometimes flip the script entirely, with the south sitting proudly at the top. To those map makers, it made perfect sense. The north-up thing didn't become standard until the Renaissance, when navigational tools like compasses nudged map makers to settle on north. But let's be real. The Earth doesn't have a natural up or down. It's a floating ball in space. Allow me to grab my globe again. So technically, an upside-down map of the world is just as accurate as the one hanging in your classroom. The only reason the North gets the glory is because Europeans decided it should. This still looks really weird. 22. The Peters projection was a bombshell. When German historian Arno Peters introduced his projection in the 70s, he wasn't just tinkering with cartography. He was starting a fight. His map showed countries by true area, not stretched out shapes. That meant Africa and South America suddenly looked enormous compared to the familiar Mercator version, while Europe and North America shrank. People freaked out. But why so much drama? Because maps shape how we think about the world. If your map makes wealthy nations look huge and poor nations look tiny, you grew up with a skewed worldview. Peters forced people to face that bias. Today, his projection is still controversial. Critics say it distorts shapes too much. but it cracked open a conversation about how maps can reinforce power dynamics. A flat piece of paper can pack some serious political punch. 21. The Dymaxion map looks like origami. Picture the Earth cut into a puzzle of triangles and unfolded into a strange, flat pattern that looks like origami. That's Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion map, created in 1943. It's one of the few maps that tries to minimize distortion of size and shape by projecting the globe onto an icosahedron, basically a D20. Once you slice and unfold it, you get something that looks bizarre but is surprisingly accurate. What's wild is that it doesn't have a fixed up or down, so you can rearrange the pieces to put any region at the center. Fuller's goal wasn't just mathematical accuracy, it was philosophical. He wanted a map that didn't privilege one country or continent as the middle of everything. It's less, here's the world, and more, here's everyone on equal footing. A noble cause wrapped in geometric weirdness. 20. Map scale plays tricks on your brain. Maps don't just distort size because of projections. They also mess with your head through scale. A zoomed out map makes massive countries like Russia look impossibly huge, swallowing entire continents in its sprawl. But zoom in, and suddenly Russia's just a patch of land compared to the immensity of Asia. A fun fact, India has a larger population than all of Scandinavia combined, but it looks like a skinny wedge compared to those broad northern countries. That's scale illusion in action. Your eyes believe size equals importance, but maps quietly remind us that human presence doesn't always match landmass. Countries like Singapore, practically dots on a world map, wield economic influence far beyond their physical footprint. 19. Maps subtly show power. The way maps are drawn influences how we view the world, even if we don't notice it. For centuries, European maps placed Europe in the center, subtly reinforcing the idea that it was the most important place on Earth. Here in the US, plenty of maps shove America into the middle. That little choice whispers, "This is the center of the universe," without ever saying it. Maps can elevate regions, erase others, or shrink them until they feel insignificant. Colonial maps, for example, often exaggerated imperial territories to look more commanding. Even color choices matter. Use bright colors for one country and pale shades for its neighbors, and suddenly it looks dominant. The kicker? Most of us absorb those messages without thinking twice. 18. The first world map was on clay. The earliest world map we know of was carved into a clay tablet in Babylon around 600 BCE. This artifact, called Imago Mundi, wasn't accurate by modern standards, but it's a fascinating peek into ancient minds. It showed Babylon, at the center, naturally, surrounded by regions like Assyria and Elam, plus a big circular ocean around the whole thing. Outside the ocean were mysterious triangles representing far-off lands. To the Babylonians, this was the known universe, both geographical and mythical. It wasn't about navigation, it was about worldview. Maps back then didn't just describe places, they explained existence itself. Imagine carving your idea of the world into clay for future generations. 17. Medieval maps loved monsters. Flip through a medieval map, and you'll notice something missing. Accuracy. Coastlines wobble, continents bulge, and scale is all over the place. But what you do get is personality. Lots of it. Sea monsters lurk in the oceans. Fantastical beasts roam distant lands, and Eden sometimes floats at the edges. These maps weren't just tools for travelers, they were windows into imagination. People back then blended geography with myth, so dragons and whales were as natural to include as rivers and mountains. Some creatures even served practical purposes, like warning sailors of dangerous waters. To us, it looks ridiculous. But to a medieval viewer, these maps weren't wrong, they were symbolic, spiritual, and sometimes scary. Next time you see one, try not to laugh at the lumpy continents. Instead, think of them as the original mashup of National Geographic and a fantasy novel. 16. Here be dragons was rarely used. You've probably heard the phrase, "Here be dragons," and imagine it scrawled across ancient maps warning sailors about mysterious seas. But here's the twist. Almost no maps ever used it. In fact, only one known example, the Hunt Lennox globe from around 1510, has the Latin version, Hic sunt dracones. That's it. The phrase became legendary, though, probably because it's such a juicy idea, an official admission that parts of the world were unknown and maybe dangerous. More often, cartographers filled in blank spaces with decorative monsters, vague inscriptions, or just plain nothing. The myth of here be dragons outgrew the reality, thanks to centuries of storytellers, fantasy writers, and gamers who love the drama of it. 15. Jerusalem, at the center of everything. In medieval European maps, the center of the world wasn't Europe, Africa, or Asia, it was Jerusalem. Many maps from that era were drawn in a T and O style, a circular world divided by a T-shaped layout with Asia on top, Europe on the bottom left, Africa on the bottom right, and Jerusalem smack in the middle. Why? Because cartography back then wasn't just geography, it was theology. These maps reflected the Christian worldview that Jerusalem was the spiritual heart of creation. Accuracy of distance and shapes didn't matter nearly as much as symbolism. To modernize, these maps looked like children's doodles of the world, but to the people who used them, they carried profound meaning. They were less about, how do I get there? And more about, where do we stand in God's grand design? It's geography meets faith, in ink and parchment. 14. Portolan charts were shockingly good. These first appeared around the 13th century, and they're stunning for their accuracy. Coastlines are drawn with great care, and compass lines spread out like spiderwebs across the waters. Portolans were made for navigation. Unlike medieval maps that were only symbols, they worked quite well. Mariners utilized them to plot their routes across the Mediterranean and beyond. They trusted them much more than any abstract map of continents. Some historians still scratch their heads about how these charts were so precise without modern tools. They were hand-drawn, yet many coastlines matched today's maps eerily closely. Portolans prove that while scholars were debating Eden's placement on the globe, sailors were already cruising with some of the sharpest navigational tools humanity had ever seen. 13. Ptolemy's map was a bestseller. In the 2nd century, Greek philosopher Claudius Ptolemy wrote his Geographia, a book that became the blueprint for map-making for over 1,000 years. His work compiled coordinates, descriptions, and techniques that showed how people viewed the world well into the Renaissance. The maps based on Ptolemy's ideas weren't perfect. He seriously underestimated the Earth's size, which influenced Christopher Columbus's misguided plan to sail west to Asia, but they carried massive authority. When rediscovered in the 15th century, Geographia was like finding a lost manual of the universe. Mapmakers eagerly copied it, even if they suspected some errors. The result was centuries of geography rooted in a mix of brilliance and blind spots. Ptolemy's work shows how powerful a single source can be. One person's calculations shaping global exploration, trade, and even the fate of entire civilizations. 12. Trap streets are cartographer pranks. These are fake roads, or alleys inserted into maps purely to catch copycats. If a rival mapmaker reproduced the same non-existent street, you'd know they plagiarized your work. Sometimes the traps weren't even streets. It could be fake towns, fake rivers, or even oddly named features. One of the most famous was Agloe, New York, which started as a made-up spot on a map in the 1930s. Funny twist, though. Eventually, a general store popped up in the area, and the fake town became sort of real. Trap streets reveal that even the most serious maps can contain tiny Easter eggs of mischief. 11. Paper towns that accidentally became real. Speaking of Agloe, it's the ultimate paper town. Mapmakers in the 30s invented it to protect their copyright, sticking a fake town in the crossroads of two dirt roads. Then, something hilarious happened. As I mentioned, a general store actually opened there, and the town name got used on signs and even official maps. In other words, a town that began as a cartographer's prank ended up existing in the real world. The idea of fictional places becoming real isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. Human beings are excellent at filling in blanks, and once a name appears on a map, people start treating it as legitimate. 10. Governments falsify maps too. Not only do creative map makers alter reality, But so do governments, often to keep things hidden. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union created maps that deliberately shifted streets, landmarks, and even entire towns to confuse their adversaries. Want to bomb a Soviet military site? Well, good luck if you're using their official maps. Some governments still keep parts of maps classified today, especially for sensitive areas like military bases or borders. Even internet tools like Google Maps may conceal or mislabel specific locations for security concerns. The lesson is clear. Maps are not always objective. They're instruments, some of which are sharpened for deception. For ordinary people, this means maps can't always accurately reflect reality. Sometimes it's a skillfully created illusion designed to conceal secrets in plain sight. 9. The border without a fence. Most people imagine international borders as barbed wire, walls, or fences. But the US-Canada border, the longest international border in the world, is often nothing more than a cleared line through forests, fields, or lakes. Known as the Border Vista, it's basically a maintained strip of treeless land up to 6 meters wide that runs for thousands of miles. No giant fence, no wall, just a noticeable gap. In some towns, the border even cuts through buildings. You can stand in the US while your friend is in Canada just across the room. Of course, there are official checkpoints for vehicles and travelers, but much of the line itself feels almost invisible. It's a reminder that borders are political agreements first, physical barriers second, and makes you realize how artificial the idea of dividing lines on a map can really be. 8. How maps carved up Africa. When European powers divided up Africa in the late 19th century, they did it with maps, and not in a thoughtful way. At the Berlin Conference of 1884-85, European nations huddled around tables and drew straight lines across the African continent, establishing colonies without regard for the people who lived there. Tribes, languages, and traditions were ripped apart overnight as a result of pen strokes on paper. Such borders have left a legacy that many African countries are now dealing with due to their arbitrary divides. It's a brutal example of how maps may be used as both weapons and tools. For the Europeans, it was all about control and resources. To Africans, it represented a rewriting of their reality that overlooked decades of history. 7. GPS didn't kill paper maps. Sure, we live in the age of Google Maps, Waze, and GPS in every car, but paper maps aren't dead. Military operations, explorers, hikers, and disaster response teams still swear by them. Why? Because batteries die, satellites glitch, and cell service disappears. A paper map doesn't care if your phone has 1 bar of signal left, it's always ready to go. Also, physical maps show you the whole picture in a way that little screens can't. It's comforting to unroll a crinkled sheet that displays the whole countryside at once. In a world that feels increasingly digital, paper maps are the stubborn, reliable grandparent you're always glad to have around. If you ever find yourself lost deep in the wilderness, you'll be grateful for that old school piece of paper in your backpack. 6. Maps can get you in trouble in China. You might be surprised to learn that in China, it's against the law to publish a map that doesn't represent Taiwan as part of the country. The government has strong restrictions about how maps show its boundaries, and charts that go against official assertions can get you in a lot of trouble. This isn't just about Taiwan either. Disputed areas like the South China Sea must also appear in line with China's stance. For locals, it means the maps they use every day are carefully curated to match political goals. 5. South up maps flip the script. If north doesn't have to be up, why not flip the whole thing? That's exactly what some map makers have done with south up maps. Australia especially likes this approach, with maps that put their continent proudly at the top. The effect is strangely disorienting. Suddenly South America looms above North America, and Antarctica crowns the world like a frosty halo. The beauty of these maps is they make you question why you think up should be north in the first place. They don't modify the lengths or sizes, but they do shake your brain out of its comfort zone. It's geography with a little philosophy thrown in, which shows that how you look at things changes everything. South up maps aren't just fun. They're a gentle reminder that what seems natural is often just what everyone else does. Flip a map upside down and the whole planet looks refreshingly new. 4. The Paris Meridian once ruled. Before Greenwich became the world's prime meridian, Paris had a serious claim to the title. For hundreds of years, French mapmakers utilized the Paris Meridian as a reference point. It went exactly through the middle of the city. You can still see bronze medallions in the streets of Paris that commemorate the line. The competition between Paris and Greenwich wasn't only about where they were located, it was also about status. When worldwide standards were established in 1884, Greenwich won out, owing to Britain's naval superiority and influence on global trade. The Paris line has faded into oblivion, but the markings remain as a peaceful ghost of an alternate reality. Imagine if history had turned out differently. Every map and GPS system today may be calibrated to Paris rather than Greenwich. 3. The international dateline Zigzags. On a map, you may imagine the international dateline to be a nice straight line that separates one day from the other. In fact, it zigzags like a drunken sailor. The rationale is simple. Countries didn't want to be divided into separate days, so the line bends and loops around islands and territories, making sure whole nations stay in the same time zone. For example, Kiribati actually pushed the line eastward in 1995 so the entire country could share the same day, even if it meant some islands technically jumped across the line. The result is a wobbly boundary that looks more like a doodle than a strict division. 2. Google Maps constantly updates. Think the map on your phone is static? Pfft, not even close. Google Maps updates thousands of times a day, tweaking roads, businesses, landmarks, and even imagery. Roads get rerouted, new neighborhoods pop up, and businesses vanish, all reflected faster than ever. Sometimes it's volunteers who provide updates, although I'm still trying to get them to put Boma and Animal Kingdom Lodge at the right place. Google. I digress. Sometimes satellite scans, and sometimes just ordinary users reporting changes. The pace is dizzying. The permanent map you see now might look a little different tomorrow. This continual change shows that maps aren't fixed facts, they're living texts. They breathe with the world, morphing as fast as cities sprawl and landscapes shift. If you've ever driven somewhere and found a road that wasn't there last week, or one that disappeared, it's proof in action. Maps today aren't dusty atlases gathering cobwebs. They're alive, pulsing with the restless rhythm of the planet. 1. Cartograms warp reality on purpose. Ever seen a map where countries are blown up like balloons or shrunk to pebbles? That's a cartogram. Instead of showing land by actual size, cartograms resize countries based on data like population, GDP, or even coffee consumption. The results are wild. India and China balloon to dominate the image, while Canada shrivels into a sliver. At first glance, it looks wrong. But that's the point. Cartograms visually hammer home information that raw numbers can't. They show us where people live, where wealth concentrates, or where they cluster in a way you'll never forget trends. Sure, you wouldn't want one to navigate with, but as storytelling tools, they're unbeatable. They bend reality not to deceive, but to reveal. And now, bonus trivia time. Did you know the world's largest map is carved into the ground in Spain? Built in the 90s, the map measures about 600 square meters and was designed to show the Roman world as it looked at its peak. Alright, that's all I got for you today. But wait, there are some facts about our changing continent that you'll find disturbing. Check out this video for that. And like I said, as always, like, share, comment, subscribe, notification bell so you don't miss out on anything. Thank you guys so much for everything. I love you all so much. I'll catch you next time. Get a map, get a map, get a map, get a map. I didn't watch Dora.